We're really looking to set up a future where everyone has this like shared resource of tools and ways to connect and play together so that they can take that experience and share it with their friends, share their creativity together, and create the next 50 years of D&D.
Hey everybody, it's the Brewmaster here. If this is your first time to the channel, then welcome. And to you over 8,000 ass-kicking hellions out there, hey, it's great to see you again. For fans of the channel, my last video covering hardcore combat, which is part 2 to my raid method video, was smothered by YouTube, killed for firearms related content. So for a hardcore combat video that's quite literally too hardcore for YouTube, click here. The 2024 editions of Dungeons & Dragons, delayed until 2025 and hyped as the fastest selling D&D product ever, is in an embarrassingly sorry state right now, with even diehard fans walking away and condemning the game's direction. And as 5E's lead designers Chris Perkins and Jeremy Crawford say goodbye to the franchise, many fans are predicting the fall of WotC and the end of D&D's dominance in tabletop RPGs. But what many people don't know is that D&D has really always had a turbulent history, one steeped in blood and betrayal. And its chaotic nature is perhaps reflected best in the life of one of the world's most controversial game designers, Gary Gygax. Ernst Gary Gygax was born in Chicago, Illinois, where I'm from, actually, in 1938, to Almeda Emily Posey Burdick and Ernst Gygax, a former Chicago Symphony Orchestra violinist. At 7, Gary joined a group of boys called the Kenmore Pirates, and after a violent altercation with another gang of boys, his father moved the family to the Posey estate in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And it was there, away from the city noise, that Gygax fell in love with games, especially miniatures, fantasy, and sci-fi, and formed lifelong friendships with Mary Powell and Don Kay. While working as a teenage shipping clerk for Kemper Insurance in Chicago, he discovered Avalon Hill's Revolutionary War game, Gettysburg, and became enamored with the convention still used in tabletop RPGs today, the hexagonal grid. And already, the seeds for a new kind of game were starting to be planted. Around this time, Mary Powell returned from an extended trip, and Gygax proposed, and she accepted, despite him only being 19. Now, their mutual friend, Don Kay, who was also in love with Mary, well, yeah, he didn't go to the wedding. Gygax moved his family back to Chicago, where he worked and raised 2 children, but never abandoned his obsession for wargaming. And on one infamous night even, his wife stormed into the basement expecting to catch him with a mistress, and instead found him in a room full of sweaty men, rolling dice with miniatures all over the place and maps, which is, for the record, just downright hilarious. There's like the original trope of, you not being able to game and your lady busting in on you thinking that you're doing something and you're just like, with your boys playing PS5. It's just, that just tickles me. Well, he began writing articles about the hobby and eventually co-founded the IFW, or the International Federation for Wargamers, with Bill Spear and Scott Duncan. The group absorbed smaller clubs and became a hub for wargamers to share rules and homebrew content by mail. Gygax also founded the Castle and Crusade Society, cementing his love for those alliterative names, no doubt. And in 1967, Gygax organized a 20-person gaming meeting in the basement of his home, the seeds of an event that would later go on to be called the Lake Geneva Convention, also known worldwide as the Gen Con Gaming Convention, one of the largest conventions of any kind in the world, a legitimate haven for nerd culture, drawing a global audience each year well into the tens of thousands. And it was at Gen Con that 2 geniuses would meet. Dave Arneson, just 21 at the time and still in university, pitched Gygax a prototype iteration of Chainmail, a wargame rule set that Gygax released just the year prior in 1971. Arneson's take on the chainmail system excited Gygax as a game designer and provided the potential for financial freedom. For you see, life had taken a turn for Gary. 34 at this point, Gygax had lost his 9-year job at the insurance company, had already tried and failed to run a gaming company previously, and with 5 kids and a wife, had turned to taking odd jobs and even fixing shoes in his basement to making ends meet, while still keeping up to his various duties in the multitude of gaming communities that he supported. So he was a very busy guy, and so the timing must have felt like kismet to the two men, with Gygax needing the fresh ideas of the younger man and Arneson having the ear of a designer that he revered and idolized. However, neither man could have predicted just how bad things would eventually get. David Lance Arneson was born in 1947 in Minnesota, USA, and also took to gaming at an early age, where he latched on to the same game called Gettysburg, which his parents bought for him. After teaching his friends how to play, they all took turns designing their own versions of that game's rules and playing each other's versions of the rules. In college, historical roleplay was required, but it was during these times that Arneson found himself wanting to deviate from the history and recreate these sort of what-if scenarios similar to the ones that he found in his naval war games. And again, that seed was planted. What if war games could be somehow combined with role-playing? Arneson later joined the Twin Cities Military Ministers group, where he began introducing non-combat objectives like search and rescue or recovery into the traditional war games, shifting the focus away from simply defeating the enemy forces. We started setting different objectives for players. It wasn't just about fighting. We started stealing things, bombs, guns, food supplies, that sort of thing. Players could negotiate with each other for who captured the goal, and then had to figure out how they were going to slip the products past the blockade and sell them on the black market, things like that. Over time, Arneson's games began incorporating fantasy elements from Lord of the Rings and Dark Shadows. While still a far cry from the high magic, character-driven style that D&D is in today, the foundation was definitely there. And in 1969 at Gen Con, Arneson, at 22, met Gygax, age 31. The two bonded instantly over naval war games and ended up co-writing Don't Give Up the Ship, which was published in 1971. Meanwhile, Arneson's own setting was developing, simply named Blackmoor, a barony designed for wargaming, which soon evolved into a more magical, quest-driven world, where adventurers would quest for gold and fight the forces of evil found in the depths beneath Castle Blackmoor, foreshadowing the future of D&D. Though Arneson did heavily use, I would say, Gygax's chainmail as a base, he found it too rigid for the evolving scenarios in his games, and so he began by removing the rigid combat matrix charts used in chainmail and then crafting his own custom rules for magic, monsters, combat, and started introducing mechanics like hit points, armor class, which was inspired by the Civil War naval rules, and experience-based leveling. Innovations such as HP for individual characters and leveling up have been almost unanimously adopted across all role-playing games, even in video games today, and has earned Arneson the title of the father of role-playing. He also shifted gameplay away from the battlefield clashes to underground monster-filled dungeons, creating the first true dungeon crawls, and set the stage for what D&D would eventually become. In 1972, Arneson demoed this refined version, this Blackmoor, for Gary Gygax at his home. The idea caught on deeply with Gary after an exciting adventure in which our party of heroes fought a troll, were fireballed by a magic user, then fled to the outdoors, being chased by the magic user and his minions, fought 4 gulp Balrogs, followed a map to 16 ogres, and destroyed them with a wish from a sword we had procured from the hapless troll earlier. Gygax was instantly hooked. He proposed they develop the game together, and by late 1972, they began working on the first draft of what would eventually become the best-selling role-playing game ever, a game that they so creatively dubbed the fantasy game. But soon they hit their first major obstacle: time. Gygax feared that someone else might publish a similar concept first, so over the next 2 years they raced to complete a 50-page draft. They playtested it, expanded it to 150 pages, refined it again, and settled on a definitive name chosen by Gygax's youngest daughter, Dungeons and Dragons. But once it was finished, they had yet another major obstacle: money, or rather, the lack thereof. Both men knew that they had something special, but neither one could actually fund it. And this was long before the day of internet promotion and Kickstarter, so there wasn't any, just posting it online and getting 1 million people to back it. And it proved nearly impossible for them to actually find backers. Arneson had nothing to actually contribute financially at all. And Gygax, in a twist of fate, Nat 20 persuasion or suggestion maybe, somehow convinced his friend, you remember the one whose girlfriend that he had once stolen? He convinced him to actually finance the first printing. It was really Gary's friend, Don K, who came up with the money to do the first printing of Dungeons & Dragons. We couldn't find anybody that would give us money. At that time, I was a security guard who couldn't afford shoes, so neither one of us was willing to cashier. In 1973, with a small amount of financial backing, yes, but still no publisher in sight, Gygax and Don K founded their own company, Tactical Studies Rules, or TSR, which they created so that they could publish their own projects under it. Getting the company up and running, though, put the team on the lookout for more financiers, and so they brought in Brian Bloom as an equal partner in exchange for him financing the first print run. And in 1974, 1 year later, the first ever Dungeons & Dragons box sets hit the shelves. Usually, you had a game that sold 1,000 copies, and that was regarded as being successful. And we did 500 in 3 months. We reprinted again. I think we did 1,000 on the second run, and that sold out in a couple months. Then we did 2,000, and that sold out in a couple months until it became a hit. An instant classic was born. In 1975, just 1 year later, Blackmore, Arneson's own setting, became the first published D&D module. It introduced new classes, monsters, and was the first adventure designed for another DM to run. In 1976, Arneson officially joined TSR as the Director of Research, but the cracks began to show as Arneson resigned, leaving TSR altogether after just 9 months. My involvement ended in 1976. It was me and Gary that had a difference of opinion. But I had a difference of opinion with TSR, and that was the first lawsuit. There's been 5, but I can't talk about any of that. And though he can't speak about that, I would like to talk to all of you about my amazing, awesome, breathtaking patrons who continue to support. Thank you so much for just keeping this channel propped up. And if you too like these kinds of gaming deep dives, then please do consider going to the Patreon and supporting the channel, where you can speak to me behind the scenes. And I also give content every month, a lot of which is related to the videos that I release, and then sometimes I just like little nuggets here and there, just tools for your GM toolkit. So please do join the growing community. I would love to meet you. And another shameless plug, I'm a professional game master currently looking for players to fill up my tables. I have all sorts of modules and games to run, and I've been pulling out the stops. So if you're looking for a fun and engaging game, one of the best you've ever played, look me up on startplaying.games. Now, let's talk about the dark years. The prior year was difficult, to say the least, for Gary Gygax. He lost his close friend Don K to a sudden heart attack at just 36 years old, triggering a company-wide restructure that made Gary Gygax the president of TSR. Now, despite this tragedy, his split from Arneson the following year seemed amicable. Arneson even stayed on as an independent creator for TSR, releasing the Dungeon Master's Index, and TSR, with Gary Gygax as the president, agreed to pay Arneson royalties on all D&D products released in the future. However, unbeknownst to Arneson, something had changed with the release of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Its popularity surged, its profits were high, and when Arneson was expecting to check his mailbox and see that juicy royalties check, he instead found nothing. When he approached Gary about the discrepancy, he learned that it was indeed no mistake. Gygax claimed that AD&D was a drastically different game than 1E, and denied Arneson the promised royalties. This of course resulted in Arneson suing Gygax personally, and dragging TSR into a grueling legal battle, lasting the next 4 years, during which Gary Gygax tried to stop Arneson from collecting even another penny on the project that they created together. Eventually, the legal battle ended in a settlement. Both Gygax and Arneson's names would appear on D&D products, and Arneson would receive a paltry 2.5% royalty. D&D's success still resulted in the royalty paying out 6 figures annually, sure, but Arneson still could not forgive the betrayal, and thus Gygax had effectively destroyed their relationship. Arneson would return briefly to TSR to release more additions to his Blackmore campaign setting, and he even returned to help Wizards test 3rd edition. But otherwise, he distanced himself from the game and faded from the spotlight, perhaps aided by Gygax, who frequently did and publicly downplayed Arneson's contributions to D&D, stating, quote, "Dave Arneson never did furnish any solid rules for me to use in devising a new game. Although he certainly did provide solid ideas, I devised and wrote the whole of the work that became the Dungeons & Dragons game." End quote. Arneson's contributions were ideas, nothing more. Dave can't design his way out of a paper bag. And while Gygax battled legal troubles, D&D, once a niche cult hit, was thrust into the spotlight in the media craze referred to today as the Satanic Panic. Patricia Pulling blamed her son's suicide on a D&D curse and founded the BADD, or the Bothered About Dungeons & Dragons group. Now, the media frenzy exploded, even inspiring the Mazes and Monsters film starring a young Tom Hanks.
What are you doing? Going to join the Great Hall.
You can't. It's a trap.
I have spells. I'm going to fly.
You don't have enough points. I am the maze controller.
Maze controller?
Yes. And I have absolute authority in this game.
Game?
Game.
Hey.
Seriously, go watch it. Somebody said they threw their copy of D&D into the fire and it screamed, recalled Gygax incredulously. It's a game. The magic spells in it are as real as the gold. Try retiring on that stuff. Gygax vehemently denied that the game carried any true occult powers, yet began receiving death threats and in response started traveling in public with bodyguards. The media ran with the hysteria, playing on Gygax's persona as a devil-worshipping game designer intent on stealing the souls of your children, while increasing the mystique and the taboo surrounding the game. This created a very dramatic effect on the D&D brand, or as Gary Gygax simply stated, "We couldn't print the stuff fast enough." Sales shot up, and suddenly TSR was worth tens of millions. And eager to roll that newfound success forward, in 1983, TSR split into 4 companies, and Gygax left for Hollywood to head up TSR Entertainment, where he would work on bringing D&D to the small screen. They knew I was in the midst of a divorce, so they figured I would be happy to go to the West Coast and get away from my ex-wife. Gygax's efforts successfully culminated in the classic 1983 D&D TV show, and pleased with his efforts, he returned back to his company in Geneva, only to be absolutely stunned at the state of affairs. They were $1.5 million in debt when I came back. There were 70 some odd company cars, something like 1.5 million in furniture. D&D had launched TSR to the top of the gaming world, and they rapidly expanded with new titles like Star Frontiers, Indiana Jones, Marvel Superheroes, and endless D&D add-ons. But they oversaturated the market, misjudging demand, which would have been fine, except company leadership didn't slow down their luxury spending. And Gygax, despite the successful game and TV show, still found himself in crisis. Losing faith in TSR executives, Gygax brought in an outsider, Lorraine Williams, the mother of a Hollywood writer that he'd met in California. Worst mistake of my life. I think she lost about $3 million a year. Lorraine Williams turned out to be more ambitious even than he had anticipated. She used her financial savvy to take advantage of TSR's weakened state and seized control of TSR quietly, eventually acquiring enough shares to oust Gary Gygax, the same man who brought her in. Many believed, too, that the Blooms, fellow principal shareholders, helped Williams undercut Gygax as revenge for a falling out, where Gygax essentially held them responsible for the company's mismanagement and refused to buy out their shares. Gary had no clue that he would be ousted on the fateful morning of October 22nd, and over the span of a single 90-minute board meeting, he found himself removed not only from the game that he created, but from the company that he started. Gygax challenged the brutal takeover in court but lost, and he eventually just sold his shares, choosing in the end to completely walk away from the thing that he perhaps loved most in the world, stating, quote, "I was so sick of the fucking company at that point. I was glad to get rid of it. It was getting more and more screwed up all the time." And with further dark irony, TSR, the company that he founded, would continue to threaten and harass Gygax with lawsuits anytime he attempted to develop games that resembled D&D in any way. This effectively blackballed Gygax from the fantasy game market until TSR's dissolution by Wizards of the Coast. And just like that, both the grassroots creators of Dungeons & Dragons were gone, neither having been properly compensated for their massive contribution to gaming culture, to be replaced by the ambitious executive Lorraine Williams, with TSR struggling. Her focus turned singularly to monetization, an approach that, while controversial, was welcomed actually by the employees of the founding company, who now found security in their once uncertain jobs. Every single person I talked to who worked under Gary Gygax and the Blooms and then worked under Lorraine preferred working under Lorraine. I never met a single person who was under both who didn't prefer being under her. And perhaps this corporate ruthlessness is what was necessary to survive, because under Williams, D&D did surge back with settings like Forgotten Realms, Spelljammer, Ravenloft, and Planescape. However, still, long-term mismanagement followed. Niche product overproduction, failed novel, a failed video game, and an ill-fated card game that was meant to rival Magic the Gathering, believe it or not. Now, on top of that, TSR was also churning out D&D content much faster than fans could keep up with. Shannon Appleclean wrote, "Distributors were going out of business. TSR had unbalanced their AD&D game through a series of lucrative supplements that ultimately hurt the long-term viability of the game. Meanwhile, they had developed so many settings, many of them popular and well-received, that they were both cannibalizing their only sales and discouraging players from picking up settings that might be gone in a few years. They may have been cannibalizing their own sales through excessive production of books or supplements too." And by 1997, TSR made over $40 million, but was drowning in $30 million of debt. Layoffs and resignations, unpaid freelancers, and missed royalties piled up. With no other option, Lorraine sold TSR to Wizards of the Coast, which soon shut it down. A few TSR staff joined Wizards of the Coast at low-level positions. Then, in 1999, Hasbro eventually bought WotC, and in 2000, they, under Hasbro, released D&D 3rd edition. This was the first ever D&D product to be released without TSR's logo, and thus, tragically, TSR quietly ended, fading away much like its founders, with a whimper and not a bang. 3rd edition, launched in 2000, simplified AD&D with cleaner rules, new classes, and prestige paths, thanks to designers like Monty Cook, the eventual founder of Monty Cook Games. Released under the Open Game license, 3rd edition welcomed new players with easy-to-understand rules, and the OGL encouraged third-party creators to flood the market with waves of content. And in 2003, 3.5 dropped, addressing key balancing issues, community concerns, and adding even more content to the game. Sales soared, until WotC repeated the same mistake as TSR before them. By 2007, they had oversaturated the market, so sales sharply declined. Wizards of the Coast printed 12 different core rulebooks between 2000 and 2007, and the same time, they published over 50 supplements that added additional rules, features, races, and magic items to the game. Bloated with content, much like the Marvelverse right now. And seeking a fresh start, WotC began working on 4th edition, but the winds had shifted. And the first sign was WotC choosing not to renew Paizo's license to publish D&D content, essentially cutting off a major part of Paizo's business. Paizo was originally incorporated to take over the publication of the D&D magazine after Wizards of the Coast decided to divest from in-house magazine publishing. Paizo held official licenses to publish all kinds of cool add-ons, DM advice, and other 3E compatible content. Paizo's entire reason for being was making D&D content. So when WotC suddenly cut them off, ruthlessly leaving their official partners in a financial lurch, it angered many fans who had grown to enjoy Paizo's innovative game design. And when the public got their hands on the 4E playtest, it instantly divided the playbase. Many players had already bought tons of books for 3rd edition and refused to switch systems. In fact, the backlash was so intense, it actually inspired the creation of Pathfinder, a game that would go on to be a thorn in WotC's side for, they still are. Essentially, Pathfinder is a refined clone of 3.5 that further improves on 3.5 and was simply so good that it just siphoned off much of 4E's potential fan base before 4 could even get off the ground, which is very much like the reaction that people are having to 2024E, which I think is funny. But basically, 4th edition was widely seen as a corporate cash grab. WotC revoked the open game license and replaced it with a far more restrictive game system license, which gave Hasbro tight control over third-party content, and this was obviously a very clear attempt to prevent another Pathfinder-style breakout. But the move did backfire. Creators felt boxed out, and so basically largely walked away, either sticking with 3E or, ironically enough, jumping ship to Pathfinder. WotC's aggressive monetization strategy was even more obvious too with how they structured the 4th edition core rulebooks. Instead of the traditional trio, which is, Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, Monster Manual, right? Well, 4E spread the essential content across multiple volumes that it released annually. So for example, core classes like the Barbarian, the Bard, the Druid, the Sorcerer, they are not in the first Player's Handbook. You have to wait until Player's Handbook 2 to get those. And in Player Handbook 3, you get the Monk, for instance. So this piecemeal release of the model was really frustrating to DMs and players alike. Now mechanically, 4E also introduced a bunch of major changes. Power levels were very obviously boosted across the board. Characters were no longer these fragile mortals scraping by with a torch and luck and being one bad roll away from death. They were now these mythic heroes capable of facing down giants from level 1. Even the art style reflected the tonal shifts, moving away from the dark occult aesthetic to a brighter, cleaner, kind of more heroic style, showing singular heroes battling massive foes. But for many Lifetime fans, this did feel like a betrayal of that nitty-gritty, grounded, defined fantasy from the earlier editions. And once again, D&D was in trouble with his audience. But sidebar, I have to say that I don't understand this complaint as much, because looking at the artwork, to me, it seems like it's a return to 1st edition, or maybe even an homage to 1st edition. So maybe it's just because I'm on the outside looking in. You guys let me know in the comments. On the positive side, it introduced a new way to play the game, adding streamlined play, improved ease of dungeon master preparation, and character classes that were complementary and balanced. But the biggest question in the community, such as the biggest question that people have recently, and the source of the frustration, are the lingering questions. Why? Why change the fabric of the game so drastically? Who asked for this? What was WotC trying to accomplish? Recently, in an interview with Professor DM, former WotC developer Mike Merles actually did give some insight.
Is it true that the mandate for 4th edition was make this like World of Warcraft?
Yes, God bless them. There's fans who are like, no, it had no effect. Like, of course it was. I mean, it makes total logical sense. World of Warcraft, it was a cultural phenomenon. I mean, it was like, what, 12 million people at its peak? And TTRPGs were dying. There was a nice peak with 3.0 when it came out in 2000, but then in a year or so of kind of prosperity, and then it was just a long march downward. People weren't saying, I think TTRPGs are going to die, because they were just being gloomy gusses. Like, that was literally happening. You could see we're selling fewer copies of each book. The demographics didn't look great. The audience was getting older. So of course, like, you would look at something like World of Warcraft and say, hey, what can we learn from this? I mean, that's like business 101. I think a lot of the mistakes of 4th were just not understanding the cultural side in terms of, hey, we have a fan base that's playing 3rd edition and enjoys it. I wasn't involved in any of those discussions in marketing, but it just kind of ended up like, hey, you guys, there aren't enough of you to play, to support the business. And so we want to get a new audience. Anyways, we're going to market this game to you and replace the game you love with this game.
And in theory, mimicking popular trends makes sense. Of course, it's logical. But like so many corporations chasing fads, WotC ended up alienating their core fans. Players who had fallen in love with the narrative freedom and the roleplay depth of 3rd edition were dismayed to see it replaced by what felt like a combat-focused miniature game, where still support for 3rd edition was discontinued. So many of the fans who were fans of 3rd edition just left for Pathfinder and never looked back. And at one point, Pathfinder even rivaled the sales of 4th edition. Still, it is important to note that 4th edition did attract a huge wave of new players. These newcomers were untethered by the old traditions of D&D, and so they embraced the heroic tone. And while it may have turned some veterans away, WotC's new sales model, with its 10 core rule books, the collectible mini, tactical map packs, and all this other stuff, it actually ended up generating a lot more revenue than 3rd edition did. And so even though it was seen as a failure in the community, it was, from a corporate standpoint, not a complete, it wasn't a financial failure. Nevertheless, WotC did learn from their missteps, and quietly they were listening, gathering feedback, playtesting, and by 2012 they announced D&D Next, the project that would ultimately be launched in 2014 as 5th edition. And WotC's risky shift with 4E failed. It did. But they listened, adapted, and delivered, and what we got was a system that appealed to both new and veteran players, and it even came with one of the best written beginner modules of all time, in my opinion, The Lost Mines of Phandelver. 5E dropped 4E's combat complexity in favor for simpler, classic mechanics, and introduced the popular Advantage system. And in its first year, 5e outsold all of the previous editions. The Player's Handbook topped the Publisher's Weekly nonfiction list, doubling the combined sales of 1E's core rulebooks. Its success even drew in Matt Mercer, a man with a plan to set up an unknown little live stream called Critical Role, because D&D was simpler and more easily accessed than Pathfinder, which was actually Matt Mercer's preferred game. But due to 5e's popularity, he chose 5e over Pathfinder as the flagship game. Critical Role quickly exploded in popularity, turning the casual web show into a multi-million-dollar media empire. Its success triggered a surge of interest in D&D, pushing the game into mainstream culture almost overnight. The momentum doubled with Stranger Things, a global hit that leaned heavily on 1st edition D&D lore and imagery, cementing D&D's place as a cultural juggernaut. Critical Role and Stranger Things pushed D&D into pop culture spotlight, and WotC's open license fueled a content boom, enabling creators to make literally millions of dollars while still growing the D&D community. This era saw the rise of major DMs like Matt Mercer, Mulligan, and Angar, YouTubers like the Dungeon Dudes and Ginny D, companies like D&D Beyond and Darrington Press. WotC even partnered with indie creators on top-tier fan-favorite releases like Tal'Dorei or The Dungeons of Drakkenheim, marking an absolute high point for fan satisfaction. And in 2020, COVID lockdowns boosted all entertainment, including D&D. 5e's popularity exploded. Profits soared beyond their record limits, and it seemed like nothing could stop 5e's momentum. The commotion of D&D's success eventually did catch Hasbro president Cynthia Williams' attention. Previously dismissing D&D as a minor asset next to Magic the Gathering, she could now see its potential. Her next statement on an investor call would signal a major shift and the beginning of the end of the renaissance for D&D. D&D has never been more popular, and we have really great fans and engagement, but the brand is really undermonetized. With D&D's newfound importance to Hasbro, executives began looking for ways to squeeze out more revenue, starting with third-party creators profiting under the open game license. Hasbro saw that free flow of money as theirs, and this led to one of the most damaging events in D&D's history, the OGL Debacle. The original OGL, released in 2000, was a supposedly irrevocable license allowing third-party creators to freely publish compatible content without royalties. But in 2023, a leaked draft of OGL 1.1 revealed plans to revoke the original license. This new 1.1 license would impose royalties on high-earning creators, retroactively claiming profits on older content, which would have required publishers like Paizo to fork over millions in back pay. More egregiously, it would have given WotC the rights, full rights, to use or publish any bit of third-party material that had ever been published under the OGL without credit or compensation to its creators. At first, this seemed too hilariously evil to even be real, and many took it as a hoax. No way Wizards of the Coast would try to steal away the livelihoods of thousands of third-party creators that support its own community. No way they would try to snuff their own partners this way. But the cycle of betrayal was indeed continuing. And when this leaked document was confirmed to be real, it threw content creators every magnitude into disarray. The community outrage was swift and loud, canceling their D&D Beyond subscriptions, condemning WotC and Hasbro, and openly protesting both companies.
You want to explain yourself? Grab that OGL there, please. Wrap it around yourself, and please sit in that stool. What are you doing?
Making a mistake.
Making a mistake.
Then I asked him about the plans he talked about online for the community.
You know what would be a huge turn on for me? What? Watching you
Give me all the rights to your content.
She says, I don't think I want to
Work for you for free.
Would you for me? You're gonna make this
Content creator give you their work for no pay and no credit.
Was that your plan?
It really wasn't.
Well, why did you say it then?
I was just messing around with it. I wasn't.
You're just messing
serious.
around.
I really wasn't just.
You gave her instructions about using
PDFs.
very specific instructions. I mean, I can only imagine what would have been going on in this house had I not been here.
The protests even made it to major news outlets such as CNN and the New York Post, but WotC didn't completely budge. They actually spent several more weeks trying to release different iterations of the OGL, different versions, different tweaks, but further attempts to restrict the original license just resulted in more and more, further and further, more furious backlash. Finally, after weeks of protest and losing millions of players, WotC finally got the message, stating rather thickly, "It's clear from your reaction that we rolled a 1." So yeah, they eventually changed course, canceling all of their plans to change the OGL, and they even issued a public apology, went on a whole apology tour, but many still saw this as a grudging and insecure act, because WotC refused to acknowledge the harm that this action would really have done to the community, and they refused to recognize the reversal of this ruling as a community-driven victory, further eroding community trust, stating, "You're gonna hear people say that they won and we lost because making your voices heard forced us to change our plans. Those people will only be half right. They won and so did we." The nerve. This single fiasco marked the beginning of the end. And you can watch my other videos for all the full details. I've done a lot of coverage on this already. But suffice to say, the damage was done. Major creators walked away to pursue independent projects, and 5e loyalists even felt betrayed. In response, the indie RPG renaissance exploded with a wave of innovative games, rising to fill the void. Meanwhile, WotC's own output declined. Spelljammer's weak release nearly sparked a boycott. Hasbro got caught using AI art, doubled down. Layoffs gutted WotC's staff, and third-party 5e content slowed to a crawl as the community deemed D&D just too risky. After all, who's to say Hasbro won't just go after the OGL again in a decade from now? Just like 4E's monetization push created Pathfinder, the OGL debacle also sparked a new wave of competition. Shadow Dark captured a whole bunch of old school fans. Critical Role launched Daggerheart. Draw Steel and DC-20 RPG are in development. Paizo welcomed the influx of brand new players with Pathfinder 2E, which offered a pretty smooth transition for 5e veterans. With cracks forming, Hasbro needed a win. WotC had long refused to address 5e's core flaws, instead just piling on expansions, piling on the bloat, just like they did with 3rd edition. And so they made another familiar move. Why don't we just promise a flashy, shiny new edition, one that will improve upon the bones of 5e? And thus, 1D&D was born. But fans were already on edge. Was this a true to form D&D game or just another monetization scheme? And Bob Worldbuilder did an excellent video further revealing the motivations behind the creation of One D&D.
The incredible sales of D&D and the somewhat forced shift to online play made the suits at Hasbro say, guys, what the actual frick, all those dollars, I mean people, are going to D&D Beyond, but we don't own D&D Beyond? We're D&D, make them an offer immediately. So Wizards makes them an offer, but D&D Beyond is like, no thanks, we're good. Because their previous agreement was generous. The only thing D&D Beyond had to worry about was when Wizards would eventually decide to publish a new edition. So the suits decided it's time to publish that new edition. Yeah, buying D&D Beyond and creating the 2024 core rulebooks go hand in hand.
Confusion spread as WotC named it D&D 5e 2024 edition. Players were unsure whether or not this was even a new game or like a 5.5 update, just like 3.5. And playtests saw mixed reactions. Some people welcomed the changes, but many felt like they were just homebrewed, that they were making official, that DMs have been doing for years already, or just making changes for the sake of changes. And then the delays came. The 2024 edition, meant to celebrate D&D's 50th anniversary edition, wouldn't be releasing fully until 2025. And so it felt like more corporate mismanagement. And so that makes the public trust slip even a little bit further. Finally, WotC announced a new edition would launch inside of Virtual Tabletop, where maps and minis could be bought, but only if you subscribe to D&D Beyond. Worse, the closed system meant that you lose access to your content if you ever unsubscribe. And again, WotC had committed the mistake of drastically shifting the mood and the tone of the game, so they went from a dark tone to a lighter, more flamboyant design. Again, that's far from the full list of issues plaguing 2024E, and if you want a full comprehensive video, check here for that. The Hasbro had once claimed the 2024 player handbook was the fastest selling D&D product ever, but now speculators are saying that it's the worst selling edition in the game's history. It hasn't charted on any bestseller lists, reviews for it are sparse, homebrew content is minimal, and most creators have moved on. The VTT flopped and was cancelled, wasting millions. However, Hasbro's own internal reporting completely contradicts any speculation about D&D's failure, with them reporting increases across all sectors in Q1 of 2025. However, it is also important to note that Hasbro has been caught lying about their profits to their investors before and are currently being sued for that by their own investors. I speculate personally that this might be a very similar situation to 4th edition, where it technically turned a lot of old players away and was considered by the community to be a failure, but because of its very powerful monetization structure, it still ended up being a very strong financial success. So what's the financial truth?
The world may never know.
But it is undisputable that they have tarnished their reputation in the eyes of many of their lifelong fans. The community's mood isn't even one of outrage, it's just apathy. With Chris Perkins and Jeremy Crawford leaving too, the last of 5E's original talent is gone. Fans now accept that WotC is just no longer the company that it was. Under CEO Chris Cox, Hasbro has repositioned D&D as a licensing brand, not really a game. Future content will be AI generated, shaped by inexperienced teams of developers under corporate mandates, and they're going to be pretty much detached from the heart, I think, of what made the game thrive in the first place. This has resulted in a community that doesn't really care about D&D because the makers of D&D don't care about them. And all that remains now is stone cold apathy. And apathy is death. TTRPGs have always been about friendship and community, but behind the scenes, D&D's history is one of betrayal and heartbreak and backstabbing, and many third-party creators such as Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss have been cheated out of money dealing with WotC. The game's own founders, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, struggled financially throughout their lives, even as the franchise that they built grew into a billion-dollar brand. Corporate greed has led to business failure, layoffs, the failure of multiple game editions, and the collapse of multiple careers of people involved with the game. Whether D&D can recover or not, like it once did with 3rd edition, now that remains unclear. So much goodwill has been lost. What would it take to truly bring the community back? Can you even come back from such a dramatic fall from grace? I don't know. But I do hope one day that D&D finds itself in the hands of people that remember what made it special. You know, camaraderie, dice, staying up until 5 a.m., slaying orcs in a friend's basement. When the money came, people's personalities changed. That's all I'm gonna say. Everything went fine when it was just a bunch of guys working out of basements. I wish that had gone on longer. But now you can see that, you know, this sort of state that D&D's been in, this is a cycle, you know, and I found this rabbit hole very, very interesting to go down and to see that this is really just more of the same. And you know, 30, 40 years ago, you know. So I guess there really is nothing new under the sun. But yeah, if you do like these kinds of videos, these gaming deep dives, then please do like the video and subscribe. And also, if you're looking for a game master, I'm a professional GM. So I don't know if you can see all of the books that I got back there, but there are dozens of them and many, many more that I got in PDF form that I love to run, love to play. I'm fluent in dozens of systems. So if there's anything you're looking for, any kind of game you want to get up and running, you just hit me up. And we'll be rolling dice as soon as we can. So yeah, without further ado, I'm gonna get on out of here. Take care of yourselves and each other. I'll see all of you in the next one.